The Ten Commandments are often seen as ancient rules bound to a specific time and culture. But what if we looked at them differently? Not just as laws, but as timeless principles tied to the seven pillars of justice, responsibility, humility, community, purpose, accountability, and striving towards the ideal. These pillars provide a framework for living a meaningful and ethical life rooted in thousands of years of wisdom. In this video, we'll explore each commandment not as rigid edicts, but as morals, philosophical guidelines that are still relevant today. By using real world examples and modern interpretations, we'll show how the commandments are deeply interconnected and can guide us through some of the most complex issues we face today. This is just the beginning of a broader journey into understanding these values and their transformative power in our lives. So we're going to go through each of the 10 commandments, and basically I have my pre-written like a little blurb. Then we'll go through an example of how this would apply to today. Sometimes you have to use some modern translation, and one of the dangers of any level of translation or interpretation of things, like long held religious constructs, is people can very quickly get away from the meaning or the true ethic of the document. So you have to be careful when you choose to interpret things like this. Now, with that said, I don't believe in having religious gatekeepers or anyone who's like, well, you can't understand the text because you're not someone who hears the voice of God or anything like that. I think that's absurd. I think as long as you are being honest and truthful to yourself and you're not coming in with some kind of preconceived notion of what everything means and really kind of being like an ideologue about it, you'll probably be fine, right? I think there will be differences in everyone's interpretation, and that's natural and necessary because it's based on the actualization of everything that you've ever experienced, right? It's your world building. So, nonetheless, let's move on to commandment number one. You shall have no other God before me. So, this commandment warns against elevating anything, addiction, obsession, jealousy, envy, to a godlike level. In modern times, this could mean letting substances, relationships, or even self obsession take over your life, derailing you from striving towards the ideal. An example of this you can find in stories like Dostoevsky's, I can't pronounce anything, characters like in Crime and Punishment, and show how fixations can consume lives. A couple other examples like that, right, would be Edgar Allan Poe struggling with alcoholism that prevented him from ever reaping the benefits of his talents during his lifetime, right? So he won countless awards, is now regarded as one of the greatest poets. Um, but during his time, he wasn't, right? He never got vindicated. He never really got to experience the bounty from his work. He only really got to experience the toil and the struggle, mostly because of his addiction with alcohol. Another example that many people know would be I'm trying to pull this one out of the air. Van Gogh. So Van Gogh only sold like one painting his entire life, and I believe it was like more of a trade for like a meal or something like that. Nonetheless, the idea is he made countless works of art, many probably lost to time, and all he really had to show for it was a life of consistent struggle. Um, Definitely not the way that you picture heroes or great men or women otherwise living. So, you know, putting something like, you know, struggling with mental health is kind of different, but at the same time, alcoholism and drug use are common methods of trying to deal with mental health issues throughout history. You shall not make for yourself an idol, right? This is much of the same kind of thing. You could probably separate these into like two slightly different categories, but I think you can kind of in modern days think of them as the same. We've got to remember there's a lot of differences in history when it comes to like what did the world look like thousands of years ago, particularly like 3,000 years ago plus. And can we really compare modern culture to those things? It's very difficult. So this commandment cautions against worshiping material wealth, fame, or even people. This is much more, about like physical objects, probably more than the idea of like deities or whatever. The first one probably references, for its time, much more towards the idea of other gods, right? Other constructs, God of the sun, whatever, whatever. In modern time, that's not really a problem, right? Like there's some mainstay religions that all have their own individual god, and of course you could look at it that way, but realistically, we're not creating for ourselves brand new interpretations of like the god of the stars or anything like that, but much more promoting people, into this echelon of divinity or holiness that, they don't belong, right? We should not worship people regardless of how amazing or fantastic they are. It's just not a healthy way to have a relationship, with even like not even an actual relationship, right? But kind of like a parasocial relationship to them. So idolizing anything over the pursuit of purpose leads to destruction. I think that's pretty well shown throughout history. Um, the worship of ideas of like communism or individual leaders never really turned out to be a benefit of the people. So modern celebrity culture, I think, mirrors the story of the golden calf very well, right? So just as the Israelites worshipped a piece of metal, we glamorize celebrities and wealth and the lifestyles that they live, which are usually those that we wouldn't inherently think are moral, but because they're still desirable, because of like those hedonistic underlying tones of our inner selves, right? That kind of, know that that would be pleasurable, but it doesn't make it, right. Figures like Bernie Madoff kind of showed how idolizing money or power, right, or the perception of being brilliant, of being the guy who can make all the money out of nowhere, can really lead to widespread harm in collapsing economies and causing communal suffering, right? So many people, due to the fallout of the Ponzi scheme that Madoff ran, lost their retirement funds, etc. Hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars just disappearing for individual real people who were just like going to work every day and trusting the financial advisors that manage their retirement to make the right decisions. You shall not take the name of your Lord God in vain. So this one I think is actually way less about actually like not saying his name right in vain. I think this is much more about like um do not pull divinity down to the level of the non-divine of us, right? And one of the ways that you could do that is definitely taking the Lord's name in the vain, right? We want to be pushing ourselves up towards divinity, not pulling divinity down from where it rests. This commandment emphasizes on the power of words and integrity, right? It is about respecting truth and avoiding the misuse of ideals for personal gain, right? So I think of it much more in modern context as the power of words and your ability to really be careful of your speech, because your speech is powerful and the things you say are the things you think, which become you, right? Which become your actions. So if you say something long enough, even if you don't believe it, eventually you will, right? People have heard about those who lie about, where they come from, what they used to do, etc. If you do that long enough, you will believe your own lies, and you'll get to the point when you try to remember what really happened, that you're not really able to draw that distinction between, um, you know, what's reality and your own lies. So some examples of invoking God's name for different reasons, right? So like the Crusades, a really good one. This also shows like the perceived hypocrisy that exists within religion, regardless of if it's Christianity or not. Is individuals are going to be human and they are going to make mistakes, and they, not even just mistakes, right? There are going to be people with evil in their heart and bad intentions, bad actors, and they are going to pursue power. And if the power structure happens to be fundamentally based on religion, like it was during the time of the Crusades, then they're going to use that for their own political and monetary gains. So the Crusades illustrate how invoking God's name to justify harm led to immense suffering. The misuse of divine authority shows the dangers of twisting sacred principles for power. A cautionary tale for accountability in modern faith and actions, right? So, even in the position that I am, right, it's very, very important that I don't twist um, the tales and the use of these texts for strictly self-promotional reasons, right? And it's like that's a hard line to watch, because if I'm going to communicate to you my interpretations of it, it has to come through me, right? um, Now I'm hoping everyone can take their own interpretations, and I'm hoping I can talk with other people and learn their interpretations, so the channel is less fundamentally like based around me as a mouthpiece for this information, because it's very easy once you have incentives to manipulate and to construe things in a way that make you look better than you are. And I think that's kind of what the third commandment is warning against. 4. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So I don't think in modern times this really holds up as like you have to take Sundays off from work or whatever you're going to do. I look at this much more as like this commandment calls for mindfulness and intentional rest, not just weekly, but as a practice for reflection and realignment, right? And there's both positives and negatives examples of this, right? So like if you don't do it, there's negative things that happens. If you do it, there's positive things that happen, right? So failing to disconnect from technology, right, and these kind of like dopaminergic response systems that we end up getting sucked into, um, leads to strained relationships, poor sleep, and attention problems, which lead to even more health problems right down the road. And all these things are kind of like um, they spin up or they spin down very fastly, right? The incentive structures push you further and further down, or further and further up if you choose, to go that route. Shared community celebrations and holidays strengthen bonds, encourage reflection and alignment with long-term values, right? And it doesn't just have to be like community, but like your family or things like that. But reconnecting with people that you don't see every day is very important, right? And along with just taking the time to appreciate the things that you have, to reflect on like where you're going in life and what you actually want. Like I really think that's why like journaling and diary, like those things are very beneficial, because I know myself, I don't spend enough time. I spend time taking care of my 4 children, etc., right? And like really grinding through life, working, um, and as often as I'm able, I try to remind myself that like I'm actually unbelievably blessed to have the opportunity to even do these things. And I need to make sure that my intentions, the behind my actions, stay true to the purpose that I'm trying, to invoke the journey, the pursuit of the ideal, right? And naturally, we're going to stray away from that. Like if you just close your eyes and walk, it's really hard to go in the direction that you meant to go in. And I think it's the same with human experience. And at the end of the day, we have to take the time to kind of purposely realign and reflect on things to be able to keep moving towards a moving target, right? I don't think you can think of the idea of, um, striving towards the idea as a linear um, path or a standstill target. Because as your interpretation of, how do I want to say it, of the divine and of yourself and your journey and your goals change, therefore the path changes, right? So it's not necessarily like the first time you step out on this journey that you are going to be aiming at the same thing that you're aiming at 5, 10 years in the future. Honor your father and your mother. This commandment emphasizes on respecting elders and the wisdom of past generations, even when their views differ from modern values. So, um, this one's a little complicated, right? And a little provocative. So, I think a great example of this is comparing wokeism to the classical civil rights movement of like the 1960s, right? Of MLK, etc. And it highlights the importance of peaceful and deliberate strategies for positive change that MLK and those around him used, um, versus the more aggressive, and counterproductive productive strategies like mob behavior, name calling, um, like actual physical violence, like yeah, I guess that's enough of that. But the difference between those two attempts and the difference in the positive benefit they were able to generate, I think really shows it's like we have more to learn from the past than we think. We think we could do it better. We think we understand, and we think all our technology makes us superior to the previous versions of ourselves. Not just the previous version of ourselves, but of the history of humanity, right? And the reality is, you can look really anywhere in history, you will see unbelievable achievements that people were able to do without a majority of the things that we take for granted in both knowledge and technological innovation, right? And you really have to be way smarter to be able to figure things out without everything being handed to you the way that things have been handed to us. And sometimes taking things for granted can definitely lean towards um, leading people not to try as hard. Yeah. 6. You shall not murder. This commandment reflects the sanctity of life and the dangers of dehumanization, right? So I don't think it's necessarily just about murder. Everybody kind of now accepts that as a term. 3,000 years ago, I'm not sure everybody accepted the idea of murder as, you know what I mean? From my understanding of how history looks, it's like there were people who were deemed human and not deemed human. And one of the things that Christianity was able to do, and in some ways the Judeo ethic as well, right? Was that all humans, all people were created equally, right? And kind of instilling that idea of the sanctity of life. So, genocides like the Holocaust, Rwanda, and Syria show how othering people makes atrocities not just possible, but very successful, unfortunately. Polarizing narratives in modern politics similarly reduce people to simplistic labels, eroding the inherent value of their human life. If you're going to call someone fascist, that's one thing, right? If you believe that they're fascist, and then you kind of just talk about these are the things of fascism, these are the things they're doing, and this is why I believe that they are this, right? Um, but trying to other people and saying that, this person is Hitler, um, that's the exact strategy of othering people to create large scale division, which, when it gets rooted deep enough, ingrained in us, where if we truly believe that the person who holds the any any idea oppositional to our own, right? So even like if you're here on this political spectrum and then you're here, you're like, nope, you're not actually over here, but I will treat you as if you are over here. As soon as you create that kind of divisiveness where, you know, only us inside of this particular label, and then it's us against everyone. And then you get the exact opposite from the other side, right? Violence is the only real outcome. We've already seen a lot of, verbal violence and a lot of like communal violence. We haven't really seen the physical scale that it could be, but I hope we are able to stay away from that. Specifically in America, but I know there's many places in the world that are struggling with very similar issues. You shall not commit adultery. So fidelity is crucial in all relationships, not just in marriage. At one point in time, when this was written, dating wasn't really a thing. So like people were getting married very young. So when you think of it that way, you're like, marriage used to just be the step. It's like, you know, I either get married off by force, for some sort of political reason, etc., or for necessity. But either way, marriage is going to start early, and we're going to have, a lot of responsibilities, etc. So really, the way you practice is the way you play. And if you look at this and you just say, well, I don't have to show, fidelity in my practice relationships, right? It's like you will just end up devaluing the construct of having a partner. That's what you will do, and you will push yourself, above your partner, and that kind of selfishness and hedonistic gratification is not something that has historically or statistically led to people feeling like they have more fulfilled lives. I'm sure there are independent examples where that exists, but across the spectrum of humanity, that is not the norm. This commandment calls for integrity and commitment in building trust and stability, and I think this is necessary, like even in the way that we look at other relationships that are not romantic, right? The way that we look at our children. If you view your child as a burden, they will internalize that, they will realize that, and they will resent you for it. And also, you're going to be teaching them that they don't actually want to be parents, that it would have been better if they would have led a more narcissistic or hedonistic life that was self centered. I don't think that's what most parents want to teach their children. So just be careful. There's nothing wrong with complaining about being a parent, but the outlet probably shouldn't be our children. Something that I've struggled with as well, particularly when I was much younger. And so I, only had one child at the time who was just a baby. But I remember being very vocal about, how I felt like it was a burden, etc. And the reality is, it's not. It's actually the adventure of a lifetime and the best thing that ever happened to me. Every positive decision that I've made for someone else and not for myself. I can't say everyone's like that. But what I can say is most people have a hard time listening to themselves, right? And doing like whatever your New Year's resolution is. But people are way better when they're responsible for someone else and doing the thing for the other person. Modern dating often reflects the practices that carry in a marriage. How you treat your partner in youth impacts future relationships. The nuclear family, regardless of gender specific roles, has proven historically optimal for raising productive children into young adults. And it's really hard to argue against that at all, as only recently have we really had examples of, you know, non mother father pair bonds raising the children that they usually create, right? That's kind of like the historical formula. Um, we've got like 50 plus years of the welfare state, and it has not given us very good data on the success that children have growing up in an environment where they don't have that. You shall not steal. This commandment ties respecting incentive structures that promote hard work, dedication, and productivity. This one sounds like a stretch, because maybe it is. All right. But I don't think thou shalt not steal is so much about stealing, but much more about creating the idea that people can earn something and then they deserve it, right? And that kind of like reward merit system is very beneficial. I mean, that's what capitalism uses, right? For example, and as much as many people will, you know, um, prick up their nose at capitalism, or at least the way that we do. We're not actually capitalists in the U.S., um, but we do have our capitalistic tendencies for sure. We wouldn't have a welfare state if we were purely capitalistic, just for that. But anyway, the point is that if you don't have incentive structures, that hard work leads to something better. And one of the ways you can do that is by giving people money or possessions, right? And you just allow somebody else to come and take it for nothing. That creates an opportunity for a negative incentive loop, right? Where it's like, oh, so now power actually can be the place of merit, right? And I can just be stronger than you, or bigger than you, or have a better weapon, or more people, and take what is yours. And that game doesn't end in without violence, and it also doesn't really end because there's always a bigger, badder, stronger, right? In the animal kingdom, when you have chimpanzees that are the big strong chimpanzee, forces all the other ones down. As you stick around, as many biologists have, and see over time what happens to them. Someday you're not up to snuff, might have a cold or something, and two younger smaller, less dominant on an individual basis, chimpanzees rip your arms and your legs off. So, I mean, if that's the kind of, combative thing you want to end up going down, then you can have structures that incentivize power instead of incentivize reward merit. But I do think that's really important. In removing these structures, as seen in communist systems, arose purpose and innovation, demonstrating why respecting the fruits of others' labors is essential, right? So by me not stealing from you, I'm respecting the fruit of your labor, and saying that your claim to the things that you have is valid. And I know when people get too much stuff, right? That's when society begins to say, maybe they don't deserve all that. And it's like, well, we don't really look at every little action they do and add up the value of those things and then say, oh, actually, that is like $100 billion. It's way too hard to ever kind of rationalize what $100 billion is and whether or not anyone could contribute enough to be worth that or have that kind of value. Those are very complex conversations, but I don't think it's as easy as just looking at the total amount of value that someone is worth and then like looking at the overall like experience of their life and saying they're not worth that, right? There's so many individual interactions that led to them accruing that money, and most of the time, right, outside of things like the stock market and zero sum games, right, but most of the time it's based off of productivity and hard work. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So this commandment highlights the importance of truth and the danger of lies. The spread of misinformation, whether in politics, social media, or public discourse, moves society further from the truth. Lies erode accountability and responsibility, creating manipulation and division, as seen in political gaslighting during recent elections. How both sides will just make up absolutely crazy stuff about each other, um, to do whatever it really takes to get people to believe that the other side is almost subhuman, right? When it should be much more about just the policies. It's like there's, a couple different options of how to run these policies. You run for one option, you run for another option, and then we talk about why we believe our vision is better for the future of America, and then the society decides to vote, etc. Even though we know the electoral college decides who gets it anyway, but you get to elect the people who go to the electoral college, right? So in some way, there is a level of responsibility, and being an informed voter is not necessarily a benefit to anyone. So the real point of that one is just to make sure, honesty is important. Really valuing not just the idea that there is a truth, right? That there is some sort of universal truth, um, but that the best thing that we could do in life is search for that, define it, and share it, right? It's almost like a smaller version of striving towards the ideal, because the truth is something that is less ephemeral and more something that can become, actualized, but it's not super easy. Like it's, you know what I mean? As much as science likes to make everything seem like it's easy to ground things, necessarily, there's a reason why new science comes out that expands upon the previous understanding of things, and sometimes can even tilt things on their head because the understanding was incomplete. You shall not covet. All right, so this commandment warns against envy, greed, and the perpetual dissatisfaction that they cause. It calls for contentment and a focus on personal growth. So the example I like for this one is the social media comparison trap, right? So leading to discontent and shallow pursuits, right? So somebody's on Instagram and they use a filter and they look unbelievable. And even if they didn't use the filter, they might look unbelievable, right? They might just look great because they kind of built their entire life and self worth and being kind of around that pursuit. And it's definitely possible to be excellent in one, or even two pursuits or areas, but there's millions of pursuits that you can make in life. So if you've just taken different pursuits, looking at yourself and designing your self-worth on like one specific pursuit, in the example of this, like young girls looking at these Instagram models and thinking that their self-worth is only if they can attain that, which is not even attainable for all people. And like I said, with the editing and stuff, is usually like whatever they're representing isn't real. Same thing with when those people who present themselves as gurus or rich guys or whatever, and they have their Bugattis and blah blah blah, and behind the scenes they're renting all of this stuff. They don't own it, etc. And the way that they're making money usually is by selling some sort of course on telling other people how to make money, which is the best way to make money. Not morally or anything like that, but like it is a proven like pyramid scheme method. Like, yeah, you can make money if you can prey on the insecurities of people who also want to make money and believe that for some reason that you are someone who understands the secrets of doing that. And the secret couldn't be learning a skill set that is rare, working very hard, and being an honest and good, um, not coworker, but someone someone who is a good partner, right? So like if you have me as a contractor, etc., then your life becomes better because I have specific skills for etc. Um, anyway, that's a little short spiel on the the two highest predictors of success in America is um, cognitive ability, right? Which is it's nice to have, but the second most important one is conscientiousness, which is a combination of hard work and like honesty and determination, like something like that. So anyone can have those. So anyone can have the second most important thing about becoming successful or making money, however you kind of want to look at it, um, in America, which is amazing. That's why a meritocracy is really necessary. As we've seen, the Ten Commandments are more than just a list of do's and don'ts. They're a roadmap to living with integrity, purpose, and connection. With each commandment, we explore ties into one or more of the seven pillars, reinforcing ideas like justice, humility, and accountability. What's remarkable is that these principles don't just stand alone, they cross integrate, reflecting a sophisticated ethical system designed to guide individuals and communities alike. That's what religion did for centuries, for thousands of years. By millennia. That's what I was looking for, millennia. By examining these commandments through a modern lens, we uncover their continued relevance and the profound wisdom that they offer. This journey is far from over. In future videos, we'll take a look deeper into each commandment and pillar. So like kind of pairing the commandments, additional examples I didn't go over in this video, more in-depth analysis, and how they tie in to certain pillars, right? And maybe some examples of common pitfalls, right? That like this can remind us to be careful of. Together, let's strive towards the ideal. One step, one insight, and one act of integrity at a time. Thank you so much for watching.